Buffalo in the United States. So welcome, and let me say the screen is yours today.
Dagobert. Good afternoon, Dagobert. You joined the session with a listener profile, so please click on the, I suppose, phone or headphones icon on the bottom of your screen, and please shift your profile into presenter.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, very good. So this is my title. Let me move on to slide 2. So the goal is to provide an equal opportunity for learning to everyone. Not by giving everyone the same materials, but by giving each their own. So it's a good selection of materials. That is the topic of the talk. I will first talk about what metadata for learning materials are needed to do good selection. And then I will talk about what is actually available, which is much less. And then how the gap could be closed is number 4. Okay. Let me see, slide 4. So this is second section of the talk, the metadata requirements. So we need to know a lot of things about the learner. What audience does it belong to? What is the learning context in which they learn? What characteristics the learner has? Then we need to know a lot about learning objects. But I use learning materials when I talk collectively, and learning object when I talk about individual pieces. So we need to know about the content. We need to know how it's structured, how well it's organized. And we need to know the audience, the learning context, the learner characteristics for which this learning object is suitable. And then we can do a match, and we can select the best material. Slide 6. This just tells the same story. So have a quick look. We need to know about the learners. We need to know about the learning objects. Slide 7. I will give you a table on the next slide that shows for each of those 3 parts of the framework some sample dimensions, some metadata elements that are needed. Slide 8. So this is sort of the heart of my talk. And it is by no means complete. It's not at all complete. It is just a sampling of metadata that need to be known in each of the 3 areas of the framework. You can take most presentation at this conference and find out more metadata elements that are needed, or more learning objectives in particular. When we had a talk, the first session this morning by Patricia Arnold, which talked a lot about learning objectives. Avoiding anxiety is another learning objective, or at least an objective to look at. So there's a lot more, and these are just sort of by way of example. I will walk through some of them. Inclusiveness I will talk about separately. Relevance to specific problems, I will talk about separately. Metadata requirements, 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 I will talk about separat problems. A speech therapist may need a learning object that helps how to pronounce the letter R. Very specific problem. It's very hard to find that in present systems, by the way. Let me just see what else I want to emphasize. Here the structures are all pretty clear. In the learning context, I will define, let me look at disability. It is important to be able to find learning objects that are usable by blind people or by deaf people or by people in the autism spectrum. And existing systems, at least those that I know, have no metadata that would allow one to get there. Another one is learning outcomes observed. In other words, it would be nice to know how other students who used this learning object earlier did with it. That's also not available in most kinds. Slide 9. So learning context is an important piece of this. And so I make a contest to find a good title for the different characterization in the box 1, sort of the area of education that we are talking about, including on-the-job training or including patient education. They're all areas where one needs to find suitable learning materials to match with learners. And then there is scope. Is a teacher looking for material to be used in a class? Or are we talking about a learning object that can be used for individual study without a teacher, for highly individualized learning? And some materials may be useful for both contexts, but others may be specifically geared towards individual study. So that would need to be indicated in the documentation. And I should add maybe here, but I construe learning materials very broadly. So if you were to implement a system to match learning materials with learners at a university, every course the university offers, every classroom lecture that is being offered would be an example of a learning object. Slide 10. One specific dimension, particularly in the United States these days, is inclusiveness. Does a learning object promote inclusiveness? And there are two objectives here. One is to have people who are maybe from marginalized groups to recognize themselves, say, in literature that's used in English or another language course, and also promote understanding of what I call here the other in members of the majority. So in the United States, middle-class white people should understand what people of color in a poor and highly unemployment population group. And this inclusiveness cuts across all the categories in the framework. Even I think I have put it mainly under content. But you can see in my slide what is included here. Language is an important part. How is language used properly, particularly gender language? Slide 11, I will skip. The pronouncing letter R was one example of that. Slide 12, I will skip, except to say that what formulas are used now for reading level are just almost laughably simplistic. It has to be knowledge-based. It has to include vocabulary knowledge. Very important. Now, here is one that I just picked out as sort of unusual and important. There was a study actually at several places, but also at graduate school education in Buffalo. The language that teachers use in the classroom may influence how openly people think and how expansively they think. So if the teacher uses words like might, maybe, could, would, think, that opens possibilities of thinking in the student's mind. And so they it has a very positive influence on creative thinking, if you will. So language here is very important. And we could analyze learning objects by the degree to which they use these speculation and reasoning words to stimulate creative thinking on the part of the student. That would be an objective. You will not find any place where you could select learning objects on this criterion. Slide 14. Oh, this is just a lot more detail about that for people who want to look at these slides afterwards. Slide 15. So now I'm just very briefly going to talk about existing learning material metadata from standards and from two websites I have selected. If I had known about this virtual reality for schools website, I would have selected it as well because it is better than any of those I have here. So this is the comparison. On the first column, you see what's combined from all the different sources. The thing to notice is that many of the metadata elements I just talked about are not present anywhere. They're not in this union list. Schema.org is a standard which is a bit more complete than others. This IEE has this well-known learning object metadata standard. But when you look at but when you look at actual websites, you do not find that even from the limited number of metadata elements in the union list, even more limited set is available in actual sites that serve to find learning objects. Now, what could we do to create better metadata? We could try automation through text analysis and picture analysis. We could do crowdsourcing by having many people help catalog learning objects, and the same learning object could be cataloged from many different people. Have learning material repositories accumulate data on learning outcomes, which I talked about before, so we can know which one was successful, which was with what learners. And we could use the learning materials repositories as research environments where researchers could study the effectiveness of certain learning resources. This is just more detail about that. All right, so the conclusion is a rich set of metadata is needed for finding matching learning materials with learners, and what exists is insufficient. Particularly troubling to me is that there's no easy way to find learning objects for students with different kinds of disabilities. And then in my fourth part, I showed that some of these could be fixed with reasonable effort. Questions?
You are now unmuted.
Thank you for your presentation and these valuable collection of possible ways how to improve metadata in educational settings and for education materials, of course. So yeah, any questions or comments are welcome, of course. We have 5 minutes left in this session. So from my understanding, the work you're doing is the prerequisite for any AI application in education. So if you want to use, you know, advanced data analytics methods for personalizing learning or individualizing learning pathways, that should be, of course, data driven, and of course metadata elements like you're defining in your presentation and in your work is the key for all these applications. So did you move into AI and possible implementing systems like this based on your work?
Well, actually, in the very first presentation I gave at this conference 4 years ago was throwing out this idea of using knowledge-based matching, highly individualized matching of learning materials with learners to create individualized learning paths for individual learners. So this is just one element of this larger idea, which is still somewhat. I'm not an implementer. I'm more throwing out ideas, and I am still looking for a place where this could be possibly implemented. And such a system requires a great deal of work to construct in many individual aspects, and this is just one. And at the Graduate School of Education, I mean, in the Information Science Department, but in the Graduate School of Education, we are talking about now several possible grant-funded projects, I mean, where we would apply in this large idea of creating a system just like you described right now, and to delve more into the metadata for learning materials would be one of those many different projects we would work on if we get the money.
Yeah, this is fantastic, and this also has answered Julia's comment in the chat already. So fantastic comments you're providing for us today. Yeah, hopefully we can find or you can find sources of funding for implementation, and also I would highly recommend that you look into collaborations on that end. You know, there's many people from computer science and data analytics who might be interested in your foundational work in the metadata elements, and you know, embracing what you already done in your research and implementing things and testing in cases. So I see there's highly you know, collaborative efforts coming out of your research. So and Julia also says I would be interested to see what we can do together. So you know, there's the collaboration efforts already laid out.
Great, that is great, because I'm looking for collaborators, and we are already collaborating with computer science at Buffalo. So
well, thank you again, Dagobert, for your comments and an insightful presentation. I think I want to congratulate all the presenters today for fantastic presentations, for also interesting papers you written for this conference. And if you haven't done so far, go into these papers, which are available, of course, to all of us. They provide lots of more insights, of course, than the short presentations we had today. So thank you again for everybody, and also thank you to Roberta for keeping us the technology